Good morning, history classes. It is Tuesday, the 5th of May, and we've been talking since yesterday about the women's movement in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And we talked a little bit yesterday about NOW, the National Organization for Women, founded by Betty Friedan. And today's topic is kind of how the women's movement at this time sort of developed over time. And again, if you think about it, remember back to what we've talked about with the civil rights movement, how Dr. King and Malcolm X kind of presented opposite poles uh, in terms of their willingness to, how they approached organizing for civil rights, with Dr. King utilizing nonviolent civil disobedience, and Malcolm X being more willing to at least discuss the use of violence in order to pursue civil rights. And at this point now in the women's movement, we're going to see some people, kind of the Malcolm X version of the women's movement, kind of beginning to see now as being too tame and too slow in achieving their goals. And so they want to work a little bit more quickly. Okay, so it's about raising society's awareness concerning women's issues. Finding now too tame, radical feminists sought a more fundamental restructuring of society. Okay, and I'm going to make a point here that in our time, in 2020, there are a lot of people that you will find on YouTube and whatnot talking about radical feminists, radical feminism, and this, that, and the other, and kind of horrifying terms. Feminism is simply the process of demanding that women receive equal treatment, equal rights. That's all feminism is. And radical feminism simply means they desire the willingness to kind of go the extra mile, if you will, in order to achieve those goals, and willingness to upset some people. So radical feminism is, for our purposes, not to be understood as a bad or scary thing. Okay. Rather than seeking legislative change, these protesters sought to show the way society trapped women into adopting restrictive roles. In addition to public protests of the Miss America pageant, radical feminists engaged in small-scale consciousness-raising efforts. Other feminists sought to raise a public awareness by making personal issues political. Charlotte Bunch, for example, wrote that, quote, "There is no private domain of a person's life that is not political, and there is no political issue that is not ultimately personal." So this is the idea that the personal is the political, that personal, kind of home-based issues, what I'm going through in my life, has everything to do with the politics of the day and vice versa. Some feminists, like Gloria Steinem, tried to change awareness through the mass media. After graduating from college, Steinem worked as a freelance writer, including a stint of undercover work at a club run by Playboy magazine. While society tended to view Playboy bunnies in glamorous terms, Steinem revealed how much humiliation they had to endure to make a living. In 1972, she helped co-found Ms., a feminist magazine. Its title meant to protest the social custom of identifying women by their marital status rather than as individuals. So the use of Ms., MS, or MS period, was meant as a way to stop using Mrs., MRS, which is a way, of course, of identifying a woman as being married, as opposed to Miss, MISS, which traditionally has been used to identify an unmarried woman. And for me, in my personal life, I've just come to use Ms., MS, as my standard way of addressing any woman, because it's not a way of addressing her by way of her marital status. It just makes more sense to me to use Ms. Okay, opposing the women's movement, some Americans, both men and women, openly challenged the women's movement. Phyllis Schlafly and she is the subject of a new biopic actually here recently. Forget now the name of the movie. Phyllis Schlafly, for example, is a conservative, I believe she's dead now, conservative political activist who denounced women's liberation as, quote, a total assault on the family, on marriage, and on children. She worked hard to defeat the ERA, arguing that the act would compel women to fight in the military, end sex-segregated bathrooms, and hurt the family. Her argument resonated with many conservatives. Due to conservative opposition, the ERA fell 3 states short of becoming a constitutional amendment. And we've talked a little bit this year about the fact that, I think it was Virginia, has now actually ratified the ERA, so it's come up in the news again. I don't necessarily think it's going to become an official amendment, but it might. Okay, lasting effects of the women's movement. The women's movement affected all aspects of American society. Women are a little bit over half the population of the United States. Women's roles and opportunities expanded. Women gained legal rights that had been denied them, and feminists sparked an important debate about equality that continues today. Yet the issues they raised continued to divide Americans. Some say that women haven't made enough gains. Others fear that the movement has actually harmed society. Before the 1960s, there were no federal laws prohibiting gender discrimination. The Civil Rights Act of 1964, however, gave feminists a legal tool. It included a clause called Title VII that outlawed discrimination on the basis of sex. The clause was actually inserted by civil rights opponents who thought it was so outlandish that it would make the entire bill look ridiculous. This is what's called a poison pill in legislative terms. A poison pill is if you oppose a bill, there's a bill that's come up before Congress or wherever that you don't want to pass. A poison pill is where you add an amendment to that bill that seems to you to be so crazy and so outrageous that it will make the whole bill fail. That's what opponents of the Civil Rights Act were trying to do with Title VII. Then, of course, the bill actually passed and Title VII became law. When the bill actually passed, however, women used Title VII to challenge discrimination. The bill also set up the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, or EEOC, to enforce the federal prohibition on job discrimination. Enforcing Title VII, even with the EEOC, was often difficult. Still, NOW and other feminist organizations tirelessly filed suits against employers who refused to hire women or to pay them fairly, compelling the federal government to act. President Kennedy established the Commission on the Status of Women in 1961 to examine workplace discrimination. Title IX of the Higher Education Act of 1972 banned discrimination in education. And if you follow sports at all, you may well have heard about Title IX. Title IX is the section of federal law that requires that women's sports be funded equally with men's sports in higher education. That's why we have so many great women athletes in this country who are allowed to develop their talents through college, higher education, things like that. That's had a particularly big impact on things like women's soccer. The national women's soccer team has been for years the team to beat, the outstanding team in the world. Okay. The Equal Credit Opportunity Act, passed in 1974, made it illegal to deny credit to a woman just because of her gender. Financial issues have always been a big part of feminism because if you have access to credit, if you have access to equal pay for equal work, that means a great deal more liberty for you as a woman than would be the case if you remain dependent on a husband or any other man for your financial security. And this is an ongoing issue with women's rights. And of course, now we are now within the fourth wave of feminism, but it's still an issue for women to be able to be independent financially. That's what truly independence and equality means. And one of the things, unfortunately, that we've been seeing with our current quarantine, our current lockdown situation, is that a lot of domestic violence, marital violence has increased because people haven't been able to leave their homes. It's put a lot of women in danger who might have been able to leave bad, violent marriages before had they been more economically self-sufficient. Okay, some feminists consider their most important legal victory to be the 1973 Supreme Court decision in Roe v. Wade, which assured women the right to legal abortions. Prior to Roe, most states outlawed or severely restricted abortion. Some women turned to illegal and often dangerous ways to end their pregnancies. The case in this decision was highly controversial at the time and still is today. Okay. And that's a discussion that would merit, we could spend weeks, honestly, on Roe. But there again, from a feminist point of view, Roe v. Wade becomes, as much as anything, an economic argument. Because if you are able to terminate an unwanted pregnancy, and certainly a pregnancy that might harm you physically, that is going to be able to allow you to do things like keep working, not keep you tied at home if you need to support yourself and any other kids you might already have. If say you have a child who is 13, 14, 15 years old, that child is able to stay at home by themselves while you go to work. But if you have an infant, you're not able to go to work because that infant needs you at home. So Roe v. Wade is about sex, but it is also about financial independence from a feminist point of view. Okay, the women's movement fostered a shift in attitudes among both men and women, and the American workplace today reflects this change. The percentage of women in the workforce has grown from about 30% in 1950 to more than 60% in 2000. So too has the number of married female workers. Fields long closed or severely limited to women, such as medicine, law, and accounting, have opened up as well. The general shift in attitude symbolized by these changes has created a world of possibilities for many young women who never knew a time when women were not allowed to do these things. So, when I was a kid, there were female doctors, but not many. There were not many women in the field of medicine. Currently, my cardiologist in Tulsa is a woman, and in fact, a woman of Chinese descent, which, not too many generations ago in the United States would have been unheard of. And she's great. I love my cardiologist. She's fantastic. So, this seeing of more women coming into traditionally more male occupations and roles has been a huge boon for society. I mean, if you're not allowing that to happen, you're wasting the talents of half of your population, which is not a good thing. Okay. Despite these gains, the average woman still earns less than the average man, partly because many women continue to work in fields that pay less. Some people have referred to this situation as a quote-unquote pink-collar ghetto. Whether this is because of discrimination or because women who shoulder family responsibilities often have limited job choices remains a matter of debate. Many studies suggest that a quote-unquote glass ceiling exists, limiting the advancement of even the most highly educated and skilled women workers. The glass ceiling was something that particularly came up in the 2016 election when, of course, we had Hillary Clinton running against Donald Trump. Hillary Clinton, whatever your beliefs might be, has far more experience in government, far more experience in diplomacy than Donald Trump does. Still lost the election. So this is still an issue that is confronting us where a much, much more qualified person in terms of her experience was not elevated to the presidency, in large part because she is a woman. Okay. Most troubling, the United States has witnessed a feminization of poverty over the last 30 years. That means that the majority of the nation's poor people are single women. Okay, this goes back to employment discrimination, goes back to Roe versus Wade, and the ability to terminate an unwanted or unsupportable pregnancy. These are the things, abortion is still legal in the United States, but it's pretty severely restricted simply by the fact that there are not many places to obtain an abortion. And so you have a situation, that doesn't cause the feminization of poverty, but it has to do with it. It's one factor that goes into it. These are the women in the lowest paying jobs with the fewest benefits. Many of these poor women are single mothers who must bear the costs and responsibilities of raising children alone while also working. So, that when you think about this, when you think about the feminization of poverty, imagine that single mother in a situation she's got, at least one child, more often than not, more than one child. Think about what a minimum wage job pays. Minimum wage is still, I think, $7.35 an hour, which is not much. If you've got to put a roof of some kind over your and your children's head, that's going to take up the huge majority, Bella, be quiet, the huge majority of what little you make at your job. So this is what directly leads to the feminization of poverty. Okay, so that's the end of that chapter. I'm going to have me not so much yammering at you tomorrow, and I'm going to go ahead and log off so that I can make my dog be quiet. Hope you all are well, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.